So in this module, I've entitled it, How Does it Compare to His Other Works? By it, I'm referring to Carnival of the Animals, and I'm going to talk about how the characteristics that his other works have that his piece, Carnival of the Animals, did not have, or what he felt, and answer the question, why didn't he want it published? Because Saint-Saens did not want his Carnival of the Animals works published until after he had passed away. At no point in his life did he want it published. He okayed the Swan movement of his work to be published, but did not want the rest of it published until after he had died. So I'll do a little compare and contrast with his previous works to Carnival of the Animals and what he was typically known for as a composer. So his genres that he wrote for over his lifetime, he wrote for operas, he wrote for symphonies, concertos, he wrote for choral music, both sacred and secular. He wrote for solo pianos, and he wrote chamber music as well. Operas, one of his most well-known works was Samson and Delilah. That was one of his most well-known works. He wrote many symphonies. His concertos, his Piano Concerto No. 2 is one of his well-known works, as well as he wrote a well-known cello concerto as well. Solo piano, he wrote pieces for this, and he was known as a very, very good pianist. He's considered one of the best of his time. So he definitely favored that instrument a lot. So his works have many French characteristics. His compositional approach was inspired by the French classicism, so that's where he kind of got his foundation for the way he wrote. His music is described to be very elegant music, meaning it was considered like very neat and clean and polished. It was never real excessive, but it was noted that it lacked emotion a little bit, and I think this is because of the technical elements that he included in his works. So many of his pieces were considered technically difficult and required the skill of a professional, a virtuoso, someone who was really well versed in that area. So that's kind of who he wrote some of his pieces for, especially I think piano. Being a pianist himself, he expected a lot from his performers that would play his piano works. Kind of held them to a different regard. He emphasized a sense of form. He was very, very clear with the type of form he wanted in his work. So if he would use sonata form in many of his pieces. His chamber work actually was considered to be a little less accessible to the audience because later on in some of his works he started experimenting with different sounds and stuff, and the technicality as well just didn't lend itself as well to the ear as some of his other pieces would. This was an interesting quote that I liked that he wrote actually in a letter to a friend. He said, "What gives Sebastian Bach and Mozart a place apart is that these two great expressive composers never sacrificed form to expression. As high as their expression may soar, their musical form remains supreme and all-sufficient." And I think this is very kind of telling of how he felt about form in his works. He was very clear. He was very, very loyal to form. He did not really venture away from that. However, like all composers, he wanted to explore and experiment with stuff. So later on, he added some avant-garde elements, I guess. So while most of his works were conventional, like his earlier works, he did have some brushes with musical elements that were unconventional. So, for example, in the next piece we're going to look at is the Piano Concerto No. 2. There are many parts of this that are conventional, but there are some he uses a varied sonata form towards the end of his piece. So, Piano Concerto No. 2 in G minor. It's scored for pairs of woodwinds, horns, trumpets, timpani, and strings. It is one of his 5 piano concertos, so this is Concerto No. 2. And the way this came about is that somebody asked him to give a concert, and he didn't have time he had to find a way to prepare music for this. So he composed Piano Concerto No. 2, and it was not received very well, mostly because he felt that because it was such a hurried composition, and that he didn't have enough time to prepare. He didn't have much time to prepare for his work. So the piano concerto is broken down into 3 parts. The first one is the Andante sostenuto. This part was written in G minor and in sonata form, and it begins this movement begins with like a cadenza introduction, and so like an improv intro, which kind of gives a little nod to Bach, what he used to do with his cadenzas. There's a first theme, there's a second theme, then the recapitulation, and then Bach inserts Camille Saint-Saens inserts another cadenza, and then finally ends this movement with a coda. The second movement is called the Allegro scherzando. It's written in E flat and also in sonata form, and it as well has 2 main themes. This movement was considered the prequel to Carnival of the Animals, and can actually be kind of heard. He used part of this concerto in Carnival of the Animals, and then the finale, which was a presto tarantella, is thought to kind of be reminiscent of Mendelssohn's Italian Symphony 25 years earlier, because it ends in a minor key tarantella. It's also in a sonata form, as well as the first 2 movements. So throughout this piece, he experiments with form. He replaces the sonata form, the usual sonata form in the first movement, with a little bit more of a different structure, and opening with cadenza, which was not very well known at this time. Then the second movement and the finale are just very contrasting with the opening movement. And there's a quote from Zygmunt Stajowski, and he said that the work begins like Bach and ends like Offenbach. So he started this piece off very structured, very true to form, with the sonata, adding the cadenza in there, something different, and he ends very experimental with a finale and the minor key tarantella. So that's an example of where he kind of combines the form with his more experimental methods. And then Carnival of the Animals. So it has some similar instrumentations. It contains the strings. It has the winds and the trumpets as well. And they add a glass harmonica on the Carnival of the Animals. The Carnival of the Animals contains much more humor than Bach included in some of his other works. He meant for some of the things like the donkeys laughing at the critics, stuff like that. He included a lot more of that, and with the nod, the can, and in the tortoise, stuff like that, that he did not feel was considered very conventional, I guess, of his works. Usually his works were much more serious and had much more structure and form to them, whereas Carnival of the Animals did not have much of that, that as he would have liked. This is also considered a program work, which is similar to his other piece, the Danse Macabre, which is used to tell a story, or in this case, it's used to demonstrate different animals, depict different animals throughout the piece. And he manipulates the instruments to sound like the animals, which again is a step away from his usual symphonies and operas, where he was serious and used some serious subject matter and was very, very true to the structure and the form of Bach. Like Stajowski said, kind of comparing some stuff to Bach were very neatly all together. And even back to his French characteristics that he included, very polished and neat and clean. This is Carnival just kind of gives the idea of kind of far away from that, a little more fun, a little more humorous. So those are the ways that Carnival of the Animals kind of differs from what he was usually known for.